Our political director, Andrew Rafferty, joins us now. And we're the question on everybody's mind is, does Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth survive?
Well, look, if you talk about the Signalgate stuff, I think the president and his administration feel like they already took their pound of flesh with essentially putting Mike Walls, who was the national security advisor, who started that group chat, out to New York to work with the United Nations, a much less of a high-profile role in this version of a White House administration. Pete Hegseth is interesting, though, because, look, we've seen this president who is normally really he insulates himself against some of the criticisms that come his way from especially Democratic lawmakers. It tends to sort of double down instead of capitulating. It's when we start to see the pressure from people closer to him, people who are more aligned with his base, that he starts to make moves. Traditionally, cabinet is an area where he normally doesn't make any rash decisions immediately. Pete Hegseth, we saw him sitting next to the president at that meeting earlier this week. So I think that I don't expect any moves in the immediate. Obviously, it's hard to predict any sort of behavior out of this president. But when you take what we saw from the Inspector General's report today, of course, as we learn more about Venezuela, and there's still a lot that we don't know, and most specifically that tape, that could change quickly.
I counted the top 5 stories of the Washington Post today. All of them were negative stories about Pete Hegseth. You know, the president's approval rating, we've been talking about, has been tanking because people say he's not focused enough on the economy, but now we're talking about boat strikes in Venezuela. How does the American public feel about that? Yeah,
look, this is not something the American people really thought too much about in the campaign. This was not a top issue. And now that they are sort of understanding what it is, there is a fair amount of skepticism, especially when it comes to these strikes. This is some polling. It's worth noting, Del, that this polling was done before this so-called double tap, these double strikes. All of that information has come out. This is just support for strikes on suspected drug boats. And you see a narrow majority of the country does approve of that. Of course, that is driven mostly by Republicans. But it's interesting, you talked about that tape of the second strike. A lot of Americans, even before this recent news cycle, said that they want more evidence, or that the administration should provide some sort of proof that these strikes are actually on vessels that are carrying drugs. And of course, what kinds of drugs matters quite a bit as well. You see 3/4 of the country say that. Overall, Del, though, it is worth mentioning, there is really not an appetite for a more stepped-up military intervention in Venezuela. Overall, 70% of Americans oppose. You've seen a number of Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's obviously persona non grata now, but she was putting on social media, True Social, her opposition, just saying focus on healthcare, not Venezuela. So there is a lot of skepticism among Republicans about what military action could mean.
Before I let you go, what aboutism? It is alive and well in Washington, D.C. People say President Obama did the same thing with that drone use in counterterrorism operations. Is it a fair comparison?
Yeah, look, we saw this program, the drones being used in a much higher capacity. Under President Obama, he kind of took the mantle from George W. Bush. There was something like 540 strikes, which lawmakers, Republican lawmakers specifically, are pointing to, saying that Donald Trump is undergoing a level of scrutiny that President Obama did not. It's worth noting that President Obama got a lot of scrutiny for those strikes. We know that there were some 3,700 deaths, certainly a significant number of civilians among them. There were hearings, there were investigations, and so it's not fair to say that that President Obama was completely scot-free in this.
And he didn't tweet about it.
He didn't tweet about it, and it fit into a larger global war on terror that was underway, that people at least understood who even though, you know, exactly who the militants who were in these strikes were not known, at least not to the American public. Right. It was part of a broader war on terror that was understood in a way that these strikes in Venezuela have not been.
And we still don't understand why. We're doing what we're doing in Venezuela.
Transparency is a big issue here.
Scripps News Political Director Andrew Rafferty. Raf, as always, thanks.
Thanks, Tom.